Our guest today on the Strong Women podcast is Molly Geiger. And I first met Molly at Summit Ministries many years ago and have had interactions with her throughout that. But it's been so fun to watch God lead Molly in her life and the way he's placed her in really unique situations. And so I'm not going to give away all the hats that she wears because that's what we're going to talk about today on the interview. And just a side note, we have Zoomed Erin in because she is in California, which is sad for us on two levels because one, she said it's 70 degrees there, but more importantly because she's not with us. That's the saddest part. But we're thankful for Zoom and that we can Zoom her in. But anyway, so we want to get started telling you more about Molly. And first of all, I want to say thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
Yes. And we want to just start by saying, where are you now in life? Like, tell us what you do for Summit and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I live in Manitou Springs, Colorado, which is just down the road from here, and I've worked with Summit full-time since 2016. And I work as an event coordinator for them, so I specifically work on our student conferences during the summertime. You've probably heard people talk about our 2-week conferences before. Megan's one of our speakers, also one of my neighbors, so lots of fun, interconnected things here. And I'm very busy with that, and then I spend a lot of time volunteering in some local aspects of our community. Love to be outside, love to listen to great podcasts and read good books. So yeah, it's fun to be here.
Nice.
So Molly, we want to hear about how you got to Summit Ministries, which yes, Sarah and I both love. And we talked about Summit with Megan Allman too. But before we do, and actually that's where I met you too, Molly, is when my husband was out speaking at Summit. And then the last time we saw each other was at the Great Homeschool Convention in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm sure you remember because how could we forget that day? Because that weekend was when President Trump and then all the governors started shutting down everything. And we were all at this convention center with thousands of people. And all of a sudden we were faced with, oh, I guess this is a big deal. Oh, I guess the whole world is shutting down. Oh, I guess, well, hopefully we can all catch flights home. So that was a crazy weekend, wasn't it?
Oh, little did we know that was the start of what we now know as our pandemic. So it's a great memory that you were one of the last people I got to see before it all happened. So
that was
see face to face. Okay, so tell us about, we always like to start with people where they started. So tell us about where you grew up, your family, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Bismarck, North Dakota, which I know some of your listeners have probably never met someone from North Dakota before, but we exist. So I'm the fourth out of 11 children, raised with wonderful Christian parents who really love Jesus. That was not necessarily their start as children when they were growing up, but as young adults they became Christians and have just raised a whole troop of us.
11. So how many boys, how many girls in that 11?
Yeah, so we have 6 girls and 5 boys, but we started off with 5 girls. We never thought the boys would catch up, and lo and behold, here we are, and the boys have virtually caught up. So, yeah.
That is so funny.
Lived out in the country, did all sorts of things out on the farm. We butchered chickens and milked cows, and North Dakota is a very chilly place to live. So Colorado's like a treat to live here because I feel like our winters are so calm and mild in comparison. So yeah, I was homeschooled through all of school. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for the majority of her time as a mother. She worked as a nurse for a number of years, and then when her 6th child was born, she said, I'm going to stay home with my kids now.
Whoa.
So, yeah.
6 children before she said, oh, wow. So what was your view of femininity growing up?
Yeah, so being the 4th born and having 3 older sisters and a younger sister right next to me, we had a house that was full of music and singing, and I wouldn't say so much we dwelt in like the princess realm of things, but we used our imagination a lot, and we were always on adventures. And my mom is a fierce and wonderful woman, and she is like steadfast in her love for people. I would say she raised all of us with like a great love for hospitality and opening up her house. And a part of it, I think when you probably have that many children, you don't really have an option. Like, your just house is always full of people.
Yeah.
And if they each bring one friend over, your house is doubled with like 20 people in it.
Right. Well, even having all your kids, you have to have that hospitable posture of like, you're going to interrupt my time, and that's okay.
Yeah. I would say, like, going off of that, my mom never treated us like we were an interruption. We were a part of her life. And I think even her leaving the workforce was a loving sacrifice. But she sacrificed it because she wanted to be with us. She wanted to be a huge part of our education, and she wanted to model for us, like, you can do great things. She was an entrepreneur on so many different levels, started lots of different businesses, and my parents have been really successful, and God has just blessed them with things that a lot of it was like her vision of, hey, we could do this. Also, when you have lots of kids, you can do a lot of things. You have a lot of manpower.
That's true. That's true.
But I would say she gave us a really good view of femininity, of just, we are image bearers of Jesus Christ wherever we are, and raising her children up with like the nurture and admonition of Christ to serve him wherever we are. I don't think she's ever boxed that into like the area or zip code that you live in or a specific nature of work. But she really gave us a love to learn, a love for knowledge, and I think her being our teacher like really instilled in us what that looks like. And I remember as a young child, probably like 2nd or 3rd grade, she was like, oh, you have a report that's due. Like, I want you to do it on something that you care about. I know that your book has these options. But, like, if you care about vineyards, figure out what's going on with vineyards. If you care about how the first man got to the moon, like, do a report on that. And I think that just instilled in my heart from a young age of, like, we are our own limits of what we choose to pursue. And, just giving us a worldview outside of ourselves. So,
So do you think, Molly, that being an older sibling is what kind of shaped your heart towards young people? Because your heart and life is really devoted to young people in different things that you do. But Summit Ministries is all about, the next generation, training the next generation. You work on putting on events to bring young people in or to expose young people to worldview training. So do you think it was from being in a big family, having younger siblings, or was that something that developed later, maybe in college, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of that is definitely part of being from a big family. This is just what normal is. My sister right above me, we used to joke a few years ago, like if it was just the two of us, we would have been like the brattiest kids out there. We would have had everything we wanted. Like our world would have just been catered to us.
But you would have had to butcher all the chickens and milk all the cows.
Yeah, I don't know what that would look like. So I definitely think that's a part of it. I also think personality just plays into that, people who get their energy from doing things with other people. And I'm actually a lot more of an introvert, but I love being around communities that bring life. I also think that, like, with my parents being so hospitable, I got a vision really early on of, like, the nature of community happens when you're in community with people, and that means, like, you have to go outside of your comfort zone, or you have to give up things in order to create places for people to come and be a part of. Also, living in North Dakota, honestly, like, there are not a ton of people there. Like, our entire population of our state, like, probably fits inside Colorado Springs or something. So when we did have close friends and good connections, they were so meaningful to us. I think that's definitely a part of why. Oh man, I love the work with Summit. I love working with kids in foster care, and
Okay, so tell us first about how you got to Summit and why you stayed.
Ooh, yeah. Summit sometimes I feel like is a trap. You get there once or twice and then they keep you and you never get out, which could be a great thing.
Yes.
So I came because a friend of mine had come and just shared her love of the program. So I came in summer of 2011 and I ended up staffing that summer and just fell in love with what Summit was doing and their vision for people. And one of my like light bulb moments as a student, I remember looking around our room at like 180 other students and realizing there are so many people here that have a love and devotion to Christ. And when we feel like we're so isolated and alone, that's just not the case. And so just, really enticed by this idea of they are doing something really, really right. So I head back to North Dakota, worked at another job that I was doing there, and through all of my summers, I somehow came back to Colorado. I spent time in their Tennessee location. I was with them in California when we started California session. And then in 2016, when they had an opening to be in a full-time position, they said, hey, we'd love for you to come out and be with us this summer. At that point, I was like, I had spent some time overseas. I had worked as an EMT, and I was just like, I really want to be grounded in something. I don't want to do like little stints in my life all over the place. And then they offered a full-time job, and here I am.
And here you are.
So
I had that same experience with Summit when I was in high school, where, you know, my youth group cared about Jesus, but there was like, a person here or there that really cared. But when I went to Summit, I had that same like, whoa, there are people that really care. And there are big questions that have answers.
Yeah.
Like, that was huge to me too.
Yeah.
But, okay, so you mentioned going overseas.
Yeah.
And how did that fit into your, like, how old were you and how did you get into those trips?
Yeah. So the end of summer 2014, I knew that I wanted to pursue missions in some world. I actually thought I would go to the medical mission world, and like doors just closed. And then there was this tiny little baby orphanage in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and they had just a lot of heartaches. They had like a typhoon that came through and power outages and earthquakes, and they really needed nannies to come. So I Skyped with a crew over there. I had never met any of them. Had like a connection that knew someone that had adopted from this orphanage was how I found out about them.
So you weren't going through an organization?
No.
Oh, wow.
Like when I landed in Kaohsiung, got off the flight there, I had never met a soul from there before.
Whoa.
And so I went there and spent 3 months there at this beautiful little orphanage, and man, so much happened in my time there. One, it was a phenomenal experience to be in another culture and just be so immersed. There were missionary families that had dedicated so much of their energy to coming alongside this orphanage along with their mission work, and school teachers at a Christian school down the road that would come and hang out with little children, all of these things. And that absolutely sparked a love in me of like, wow, there are so many needy children that, like, outside of any power of their own, have been placed in a situation that's setting them up for failure in life. Yeah. And I think especially witnessing in that setting of Taiwan, where there's so many people that just believe these horrible lies that if your children have an extra digit on their finger, or if they have funny spots when they're born, or maybe they're a twin and they think one has failure to thrive or something, they just set them aside as you are not qualified to be a part of our society and you are a curse upon this family. When the gospel says the opposite. The gospel says you are loved, you are an image bearer of Jesus Christ, and you are wanted by God who has made you. And it was while I was there that my heart got stirred toward the foster care world, because I just witnessed little tiny babies whose hearts, like, they would just come alive. You sing over them and you pray for them. You take them outside in nature. And I realized, like, wow, this is what a lot of foster parents do. And my own parents were foster kids when I was very little. Like, I don't remember it at all. And I just remember thinking as a young adult and a teenager, like, that's a really neat world, but I never want to be a part of that, because I dislike, and like, never say never.
Never say never.
Like, I dislike the idea of a state or a government or something dictating like the liveliness of children's lives, and they are not actually involved in them. Oftentimes they never even meet these kids. And I was just like, that's horrible. I don't want to be part of that. And lo and behold, landed in Taiwan, and I was like, this is what these parents do. So, yeah.
So that launched you into foster care, which is one of the parts of your story, Molly, that I had no idea about. So you are a single lady.
Yep.
But you have become a foster parent. And so I would love to hear that story. So you come back to America, and then how does that door open?
Yeah. It was definitely stirred in my heart while I was there. Like, just God directing your path and giving you a joy or an interest in something was absolutely, like, there's no way to explain it outside of Christ. And so when I realized being there that these little kids, this is what foster parents did. Like, they would take care of these children, and they oftentimes don't have any say over what happens in their lives. So my mindset was like, oh, someday, like when I'm married, have my own kids, live out in the country, have a place for them to play, like, that will be the setting and the time and place. And I'd also had a lot of really close associations with the adoption world. Spent a lot of time with families who'd adopted overseas, and I loved that. But foster just seemed like a whole different realm to be a part of. So when I came back to the United States, I ended up going back to Taiwan a second time. Part of it was the ability to give their nannies a break at the orphanages. It could just be a really helpful thing, and I loved it. Oh man, if I didn't live in America, I would absolutely like live in Taiwan and work at an orphanage there for forever.
And you said, you were telling me a funny story before we began the interview, but you were talking about how one time you had like all 20 of them to yourself during Chinese New Year.
During Chinese New Year, they gave the nannies a break, and I had just a plethora of little children, like all under the age of 2. And it was like one of the best days of my life. It was
all
so
under
much
the age
fun.
of 2.
So much
That
fun.
does not sound like the equation for fun. Oh my gosh.
It was great. It was life-giving to me.
Yeah. That's how you know you're gifted in something.
Yep. Yep. So came back to the States, and the Lord just really made it apparent and put this desire in my heart of like, now is the time that you are going to pursue this door. Yeah, I want you to walk through this and pursue this now. So January of 2018, I started the process to do foster care. I had an insane schedule at the time. I traveled like 6 weeks out of 7 in the midst of that and was trying to get all my classes done and all these things and go through all my certifications. Also was like, I have no idea if they will ever want me to be a foster parent. Right. Also, I don't necessarily want to adopt some of the kids that come into my care. I think it's so important for them to have an entire family setting. But knowing that like you can be a safe haven for them if it's for 2 weeks or 2 years of their life. I just think that work goes undone. So they licensed me in my tiny little cabin in Manitou Springs, Colorado, and like a week and a half later, I got my first call for a little boy. So.
Okay, yeah. Can you tell us about the first child you had? Because I was curious. I mean, that was probably like okay, this is a make or break. Let's see how this goes, right?
Yes, make it or break it is so accurate. Well, I was in the middle of a student conference. I think it was the second Tuesday of our first session. So it's like a very busy time in my life. And I get this call on this Tuesday. They're like, we have a little 10-week-old boy and he needs a home. What do you think about this? And oftentimes we get very, very little information. And lots of my calls come in the middle of the night where you're just like, okay, give me a second to like wake up and I'll think about this. So I was like, yep, I'll take this little guy. So went and got him that afternoon. My sweet staff crew was just surprised out of their mind. And they come back from sports time, and here I am with this tiny, dark-haired, beautiful little boy. And my relationship with this little guy was so fun. Our first few weeks were very hard. He just comes from a really difficult background and had a story of a lot of neglect and didn't want to be loved and cared for by people, was a very loud child. And part of what had happened was when they called, they said he only needs a placement home for a week or 2 weeks at most. And I was like, I can do anything for 2 weeks. Yeah. 2 weeks, like, no problem. Manny stayed with me for almost a year and a half. So that was a whole different roller coaster
but just 2 weeks.
Than what I knew.
So like, okay, 2 weeks more. You could do 2 weeks more.
Yeah.
Okay, this is just blowing my mind. So if you're listening, yes, I did not know any of this information. Okay, so I need to step back again a little bit. Okay, so 2018, can I ask, because I know people are wondering who are listening, how old are you in 2018?
I was 26. I just turned 26 in February.
So you're 26 years old, you're single, and this is just I think it's blowing my mind, Molly, because I know so many people who and families who have adopted and foster care, but I have never met someone like you. I have never met a single woman who said, I'm gonna do this. Yeah, I thought I would do it down the road when I was married, had a house and a yard and everything you just said. And you were obedient and you did it. And then you get this little boy, it's supposed to be for 2 weeks, and you had him for a year and a half. That is incredible. Okay, so year and a half. Can you summarize that year and a half in like how that journey was for you?
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like people say this all the time, but when you actually live in these things, you're like, wow, like I actually get this and I grasp and understand this. I've said this with my Summit staffers lots of times, where I'm like, you will never you might underestimate the impact you have on your students, but oftentimes the impact they have on us is so significant. Because small group leaders, I want them to come in and love and invest in their people, but the reality is the opposite happens. I mean, both can happen, but oftentimes their students are life-giving to them. And when I had this little boy, my little M-boy is what we call him, I loved my time with him, but he absolutely changed my view of God. And to love someone whose life, I got a front row seat to his despair. I remember journaling about this 2 years ago and writing things like, I have a front row seat to someone's hell. And a part of it was like, for me, I had this beautiful, he's just a gorgeous little child. A life that's spunky and fun, and babies can be so fun and cute and all these things, but the reality was he didn't get a say in any of this. Right. I was the 5th house that he had landed in before he was 10 weeks old.
Oh my
So his little life was just upside down. And probably one of the most profound things that happened through all of that was, so I've had 4 little guys in my house, actually. I hardly ever get calls for girls, and the joke is that, like, I'll never get a call for a little girl. Like, I'll just get all these tiny little boys.
It's like payback because your mom had all
girls
first or something.
Now it's like, well, forget this. I have to get you 5 girls or 5 boys, apparently.
Yeah.
When I took him to go to his first visit to see his birth family, I was sad. I don't know how he handled that. He was like 11 weeks old probably at the time. I was a basket case, just feeling like, wow, you poured so much into this tiny little life, and now you have to give them back even for a short time. And just there's a lot of emotional turmoil with all of that.
Wait, pause for a second. So you were fostering him, but he still had visitation with his parents?
And most children in foster care have visitation. It can be sometimes once a week or twice a week, and it can be anywhere from like an hour to an entire day.
Because the idea is you want to get them back with their families.
Yes, if they're going to be unified with their parents, keep that relationship as open as long as possible, and work on that.
And so was it sad for you because you just didn't know the situation, or did you know the situation? That's why it was sad.
Some of both.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember, different caseworkers that we've worked with, and oftentimes they'll say things like, you meeting the bio parents might give you things to fear, but you'll probably let go of any fears that they have towards you. And I was like, oh, if we ever have the opportunity to like be gracious towards someone and eliminate fears, we should take that opportunity. And honestly, I think the scariest thing is running away from fearful things. And when you face them head on, they become a lot less scary.
Right.
And through little M's case, something that I would just say is 100% the work of Christ, and just his spirit like guiding me and convicting me. I have my own thoughts and ideas about things. It's really easy to have this idea of like, well, obviously you weren't a good enough parent, which is why your child isn't with you. And if the state chose me, like, I'm adequate or whatever it might be, which are oftentimes just crazy lies and things that we conjure up maybe to give us a sense of peace. I don't know.
Right.
And I had this realization when he'd probably been with me 2 or 3 months, and I have a great relationship with his bio family. All of my kids, except for one, I still keep in touch with to some degree.
So he is like, he's placed back with his family.
He is with extended family.
Okay.
Yeah, but thriving, doing so well. I saw him in September, and sweet, wonderful little child, and just doing really, really well.
Yeah.
So, but I had this moment of realizing, like, I love this little child that's on my lap so much, and I would sacrifice all these things in life for him. And yet I have his mom, who sometimes is a struggle for me if I don't know how to interact with her. We see life very differently. We've chosen very different life paths. And I realized, like, in my mind, I was like, if this little boy were 18 years older, would I love him any less simply because of his age? Or if his mom were 18 years younger and his age now, like, would I love her any more or less? And just really, like, that's crazy. That the gospel transcends the age of these things, and if we really are for families and for parents, we have to be for the entirety of them. And lots of times kids don't get to go back to their parents right away, or they don't ever get to go back sometimes. I still think, like, the opportunity to show them the love and the grace of, I'm not here taking your child away, I'm here to love your child until you have your child back to do that on your own.
Wow.
I love your courage in that and I think the most courageous thing about what you're talking about is that you open up your heart to these little lives that you know you're going to have to let go of. And you keep doing that over and over again. And I know, listening to you, that it's because you're connected to the source of love. And so you can handle it, in a sense, and you just seem to just have so much love to give. And I love your perspective on the birth parents, because that is just such a humble perspective for you to have, that you're not better than them, but you're just, at this time, you're in a better place to care for their child, and your hope is to reunite them with their kids. That seems to just That blows me away, honestly, Molly, because I just think that is such a humble attitude to have, and a wonderful, I mean, God must just be molding your heart. Your heart just seems so big. And I love it. It's so encouraging to hear. And I think it's just, especially just because I just haven't heard of something like this before. I haven't met someone like you, Molly. This is just, I think it's just really exciting that you are really living out the gospel.
Yeah.
And yeah, it gives me goosebumps. So,
Well, and back to your hospitality word that you talked about at the beginning of our conversation. I'm not a word of the year kind of person normally, but hospitality has been weighing heavy on my heart this year, just in the last couple months. And really goes along with exactly, maybe your God speaking to me right now, but the Holy Spirit speaking through you. But what you brought out, and we think of hospitality as like, well, I need to prepare a meal for someone to come be in my home with me and have dinner, and sometimes that can be overwhelming. But hospitality is really so much bigger. It's your mom being hospitable and never feeling like you were an interruption to her. Although I don't want to ask my kids that, because I'm sure they'd be like, oh, we always interrupt, Mom. But I was really convicted a couple months ago when this word first started being like coming into my prayers, that I'm not hospitable to the people in front of me. And what I mean by that, well, not all the time, hopefully, but just that posture of being open towards whoever's in God places in your life. And I've been really praying about that. And your story is really challenging to me, because that's kind of an ultimate hospitality there, where, I mean, this little one can't give you anything in return. And you are, of course he did, but in the world's standards of things to give in return. But yeah, that's really challenging. I think that's amazing. And I have to pause and say, because we have our wonderful producer Blake with us, and Blake and his wife worked in China for a while. He's the one making sure the cameras are looking okay. At least making us not look like we're too white, but maybe a little bit tanned. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, Blake and his wife Meredith were in China for several years teaching at a school, and they fostered in China. So I'm watching Blake out of the corner of my eye as he's like, he's resonating with what you're saying. But anyway, so that's the end of that side note. Thanks, Blake.
So, like, coming back to the hospitality side, though, I would say when you mentioned, like, make it or break it, Aaron, with this first little kid, I had no idea how true that would be. And I'm, like, a go-getter. I love challenges. And if you give me
obviously,
Yeah.
the challenge tied to it, I might do it just to show myself that I can do this, how I want to do it or something.
Right.
And so with foster care, I was like, I will never turn in my license. I will never give a 30-day notice of a child. Just this whole thing, like, if I do this, I'm going to be 100% committed to this. I'm going to be all in for this. And when throughout the duration of having this little guy that I had, and then him leaving, which was so hard. It was such a good thing, and it was absolutely the right thing.
Right.
But just like I walked home and there were no footsteps. There was no noises. Like, it was just so quiet. I just remember sitting there and being like, wow, this silence is hard. And the agency that I'm with in Colorado Springs is full of just a plethora of God-fearing families. And we're required to be part of a support group every month. It's part of how our trainings happen. We have to have so many training hours each year. Well, the reality is, like, our support groups are a time where the Lord just gives to his people. And it's just so encouraging to hear other people's stories of families that have weathered this through years and had children that were a guarantee adoption and it didn't happen. Or the opposite of, like, there's no way this child's going to be with you for longer than a month. And 2 years down the road, they're in the midst of a court battle or something. And just seeing, like, the faithfulness of God's people, I can guarantee you if I hadn't been a part of that and, like, still not a part of that, I would never have taken a second child. Just too hard to think of, like, I don't want to witness pain all over again. So, yeah, that's a huge part of that.
Back to you, when you said you first got, you knew you were going to give a lot to this little child, but just how much you realized more about who God is. Are you able to articulate that at all, or is that too big of an idea to try to articulate?
This little life taught me so much of like beauty in the mundane things. I had so many firsts with him, and honestly, some of that is so bittersweet. Especially if you think a child's gonna go back to their parents and like be reunited, you're like, I'm witnessing all these things that you should be getting to cheer him on for, and like the Lord knows all of those things, and I want to be faithful to what He's called me to today, and I don't get to decide those things. But oh man. Yeah, the amount of stories I could share, and one thing I will say that I just think is so interesting about life, and especially as like a single woman and deciding like career-wise what things are going to look like, and combining that with like things that I love and things that I'm passionate about. I questioned for a while, like, is this the craziest thing for me to ever do in the midst of student conferences? Like, I'm on call 24/7, May 1st to September 1st. I have to live on site. Like, my life is so busy. Like, it's just like the craziest thing I've ever done. And when I weighed pros and cons at the end of the summer, like the pro side of this was because I had this cute little guy who after about a month or so with him, he turned the corner and became happy, bubbly little guy and just loved to be around people. My staff crew loved him. My staff crew struggled with him right away. He was very cute but very loud, and in my determined effort to help this child learn to bond to someone, because it was really obvious he didn't have really good bonds with anyone, I didn't let them touch or hold him for 2 weeks, which was like a detriment almost to all of us, because then I had to do everything myself. I had all these people that wanted to help, and it was so good, and I would do that all over again and do it the same way. But my staff and students getting to watch this all summer, and I would introduce him the first evening that we started a session, because I didn't want them to wonder who's this little kid that just is with me all the time and would come to sports times with us and be there for graduations, all of that. And the amount of students that got to come and share some of their stories, and students that said, I don't ever tell people this, but I was in foster care, and I've wondered for my entire life if I wasn't good enough for my parents, and that's why they couldn't love me as a child. Wow. And just like the overwhelming opportunities to just be like, Lord, you are using this tiny little baby who is here for such a time as this to draw people close to you. Oh man, God is so much bigger than what I had imagined. And I think sometimes people often look at the foster care world of like, oh, what is it that you're doing for these children? And I would turn it around and say, no, like, look at what these children are doing for the kingdom of Christ. So yeah, that's how I would answer, like, tell me a bigger view of God.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the community part. Of course, you had community at Summit, but the once a month meeting that you mentioned, because I was going to ask you, okay, I know the Lord is giving you strength, and then I know also that we need community, right, around us. So I was going to ask you, how did you, every time you have a little guy, how do you get support and how do you draw in family around this little guy to just help him feel loved?
Yeah. So yes, the agency that I'm with has done a marvelous job of that, and just families that you could call upon day or night and be like, I need X, Y, or Z, and they will provide. They will come. Also, when we would go to our monthly meetings, there's one time where it's my little guy and 3 other little ones just all in this little blanket playing together. And they had their own little fellowship of these little people. But we come in and it's like, we were so excited to meet these new children that had been placed with these families, wanted to know, what do you need? How can we pray for you? What are the challenges you're going through? And the reality is, like, there's a lot of challenges. And seldom did we end a meeting without multiple people in tears, which I think is just so true of, like, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And Christ comes that we would have life. And that it just feels like it's a constant pull for us of, how sweet that we have a new placement. How sad that a family's so broken they don't have their newborn baby with them. Like, that would just grip me. How sad that you take a child to a visitation, the parents aren't there for who knows what reason. How sad that you go to court and you're in this battle of truth versus reality. And oftentimes as foster parents, we don't ever get to say anything. And that has been a very humbling experience for me to sit there and being like, I have facts.
Yeah, I got
about,
things to
like,
say.
I literally have facts about what have happened, and what you just stated was not 100% accurate. And at the end of the day, there's a life that's at stake, and just being like, the Lord cares, and the Lord sees way more than we see of all of that. I'd also say my family's been really important in that, of having siblings who are just so near and dear to me, and sisters that would send packages, and the amount of times I've been on my way to a placement call and I'll text. We have a sister, we call it our sisterhood chat, being like, well, gang, meet the newest little one or something, and so much joy and excitement over all of that. When I took my little guy home for Christmas, watching my niece and nephews, oh my goodness, they were just beside themselves and loved this little kid and would ask about him all the time. And I think a lot of that just gives you life. Also, being around a Summit community, they are people that love people. Yeah. And sometimes they'll say things like, we know that you might have your license like on hold for right now, but we'd really appreciate it if you would open up so we can have another kid in the village. So I have a wonderful community there. But even in that, I'll be really honest and say, like, there are times when it's really lonely. You have someone's story that you don't get to share. You know so much about this life, and it is their story to tell and not ours. And in the mundane things, it can be really challenging. And last year, I did choose to put in like a 30-day notice on a placement that I had. And I just knew that I wasn't in a spiritually healthy place to continue on, and I was emotionally in a healthy place. We've been very sick. I got him as a sick baby, and I ended up getting sick. So before quarantine happened, we were in quarantine.
Oh, fun.
And really hard things in his case, and a lot of people involved. And I was just like, I'm not giving this child what is best for him. And I told our caseworkers that, and I said, I really think he belongs with a family. He needs to be with other siblings. He was used to that. So he did get moved, and I was just like, my season is probably done. Like, I had to throw in the towel, and I couldn't conquer through all of this. And just even looking back now, one of my dear friends who's also been involved in the foster world, and I told her that, I was like, I think I need to not do this for a while. She was like, I would rely on the Lord to be the dictator of stating, you have no idea what he is bringing about in your life. And like, little did I know, the very next week was when we were in Dallas, and the world was going to go to chaos, and I'm so thankful I didn't have a placement then. I think that would have been really, really hard, and a storm that I shouldn't have weathered. And long story short, with all of that, I still see this little guy who's with a wonderful family. I'm babysitting him this weekend. I have a great relationship with them, and I don't know if he'll end up being adopted by them. I don't know. And then
But even just having that wisdom, though, I mean, I'm sure, I can imagine it felt like a little bit of a failure, kind of what you're alluding to.
What I've committed to.
Yeah, like maybe I'm not cut out for this. Yeah. But I mean, even just hearing you say this for the second that you're saying it, I can see clearly that how would they have known? Yeah. How would they have had the insight to know, oh, this child needs a family with siblings, and like you had the minute with him to be able to say, these are his needs. I actually am not equipped for these needs, but that's really, I mean, even that, what felt like a failure wasn't. Yeah.
So the Lord has worked in mysterious ways for sure.
As if your life isn't full enough. I also know about you, Molly, that you are a volunteer firefighter in Manitou Springs, Colorado. So I have got to hear how this came about, because again, my mind's a little blown by you, and I'm thinking, okay, like, are you Wonder Woman or something? But okay, so tell us about and I know it's something you really enjoy doing. So tell us about how you became a volunteer firefighter.
Yeah, it's a great question. Summit has like this history of people that join their crews and end up joining the volunteer fire department, including the Honkin family, who had an incredible legacy there. I think all of their children were a part of the fire department at one point. I really love the EMS world, and I'd had my EMT certificate before I came to Summit. And you have to keep up with lots of credentials things and all of that. And my friends
say what that is for anybody.
Emergency medical technician. Okay, so people that ride in the back of ambulances, people that can be firefighters, all sorts of things like that. And so my friends were like, well, you should just join the department here, and like they'll take care of all your certifications and training hours and all of that. And I was like, okay. But I also have like this stigma in my heart about women in the firefighter world of that is not the woman that I want to be at the end of the day. And I actually think it was a really humbling thing for me to join them, and it has been so much fun. I joined them in September of 2016 and have run probably a few thousand fire calls. I actually took a little foster kid on one more than a time or two, so they got introduced to that world as well. But living in such a small community and knowing that like you have neighbors right outside your door that need assistance sometimes, whether it's actually life emergencies or just something that's gone wrong and they need someone to come fix their fire alarm, whatever it might be. And they are a marvelous, marvelous crew to work with. But also at the end of the day, like the fire service is a world that really needs Jesus. And I think that especially as women, if we eliminate ourselves from a box just because that's what a culture has told us, I don't think that's a good enough reason. And I think when Joshua talks about, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, that is a daily choice of getting up and deciding today I'm going to serve the Lord and have a great opportunity to do it, like literally 3 blocks away from where I live. So I've learned like a whole new set of life skills of things that at one point I didn't want to know about, but we had to know about them. And yeah, it has been very cool. So
what's a day like you're on? Here's a day that you're on. How long is it? What are you doing? Sorry.
So there are 2 separate sides to this. One is the actual volunteer side, which is what I've done the majority of my fire world in. And then sometimes I will go as a part-timer and cover for someone who's off. But we run like anywhere from 3 to 5 calls a day. So our tones go off. There's possibly a tone going off while we've been here. Who knows? Tone will go off and it'll be like, there's a traffic accident with unknown injuries on Highway 24. So if we're at the station, we hop in the fire engine and we drive out there and examine what's going on, decide what they need. If they need help, do we need an ambulance to continue on in, clean up the scene. If it's a medical call, it could be we have a sick person or we have someone who has chest pain. So we race on over there to this house, go inside to someone's house, whether they want us there or not. So like there's a lot of like very personal things that happen. Also, when you're coming alongside someone, you're like, I'm hooking you up to a heart monitor, you're like in their space, as close to in their space as you could be.
Right.
And then with all of our COVID stuff, now we have masks, so you can't even see the person across from you. But I think it's an incredible opportunity where like we can bring more confusion or concern to a situation where you can just be like, hey, I know you're not feeling great. We have talked to 100 people like you this summer who aren't feeling great, and we are going to help you figure out what's going on. Sometimes you run really hard scenes where you have little kids who've been exposed to horrific traumas of parents passing away or car accidents where there's awful injuries or suicide things that have happened, and definitely impacts your day-to-day life at times. And something that I think this last year especially has showed me so much of like God's love and faithfulness to us as his people is such a gift. And being in a world where there's not a lot of glorifying things to God and being on lots of calls where people most definitely don't know Christ and sometimes they're blaspheming him as you're walking through the door. Like this is their pathway to hell. Today is their pathway to hell. And for us, like, I feel like our greatest moments of hell are right now because heaven is coming. And just knowing that we have the opportunity to like serve wherever we are. Also, Erin, it's another challenge thing for me. So that's really fun that I can learn new things and do it in such a beautiful little community like Manitou. So yeah, I never thought I'd stay in that world. I thought that I'd like continue on with my certifications for a little bit, and now it's a little addicting.
It's addicting. I love it.
I know, that's amazing. And I love even your attitude going into that too. So, because I was wondering how you got into it, because firefighting is typically a male job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a fact. It's mostly men that are
So sexist.
that are firemen, that are firefighters. And, you know, a lot of it is because of the physical requirements to be a firefighter and all that sorts of things. So I'm not saying it has sexist roots, you know, and that's why it's majority men. But I was just curious, and I love that you didn't go into it wanting to prove you could be like a man or something. You went into it because you had these skills. There was a need. And so you stepped up and then now you've loved it. And yeah, just we have these cultural, and they are cultural ideas of sometimes what we're supposed to do, what's
Yeah.
okay for women to do and men to do. And sometimes God gives us opportunities that kind of shakes those cultural ideas that we had and makes us realize, oh, I guess it's not from you. It's not one of the 10 commandments that only men can do these types of things. But your attitude behind it of not trying to prove you're happy to be a woman, that is obvious, and you have these skills, and so you can use those to to serve and minister to people. And that, I love that.
All right, Molly. So we've talked about several of the hats that you wear. And what's so amazing is that they all fit together. You know, it's like your giftings, I mean, they're separate things, but your giftings just come out so beautifully in each one of them. And we have to talk about one more hat. And our listeners will know that I joke about femininity talks that I've heard about, you know, the stereotypical flower arranging. And, you know, you leave these femininity talks feeling like, I don't like to arrange flowers. I mean, I do like flowers, to be fair. But anyway, you have started a flower arranging business. And we were just briefly talking about the conversation that we had a couple weeks ago with our mutual friend Megan Allman, and she talked to us about this too, because I said, okay, Megan, tell us where does beauty play into this, because there's a deeper significance to even flower arranging, and she calls it beauty as an act of war. And that just, I could see that just lit up your eyes. You'd had conversations with her about that too. So how did you get into this, and tell us your deep theological thoughts about it?
Well, it probably started as a very young child, having a large garden, and my mom, who loved flowers. I remember doing a rock garden when I was very young, and just like, why would we be moving rocks to do a rock garden for roses? And she was bringing beauty to our backyard. And my mom loves horticulture things. Mm-hmm. And if I hadn't pursued anything else in life, I thought, oh, maybe I'll pursue horticulture. And I worked at a greenhouse for a summer and realized that is not the world I wanted to pursue. I think it's something that it just comes really naturally to me. I see a bucket of chaos and can imagine what it's going to look like if it just is tweaked a little bit. And I love bringing beauty to events. And the reality is, like, it can be a really expensive world to work in sometimes. And lots of friends that get married and host parties, and we do things with Summit and the fire department. I did flowers for the fire department a few years ago. And I think it's an opportunity to be a part of, especially I think in the wedding world, of like being a part of something that is so significant of Christ's love for his people and bringing people together, and watching a couple come and get married, and like you can make something look more beautiful, and you can bring elegance to that. And also you're bringing like a life of something that smells beautiful, and arrangements are just designed to look lovely, and I enjoy it so much. Some people do all sorts of things when they get stressed. If you give me a bucket of flowers, like, I will no longer be stressed.
Wait, maybe you could come over and teach me a little bit about I know how to cut the stems diagonally so it soaks up the most water. I know how to cut them just the right length, but that's about as far as my floral arrangement goes, and then I just depend on the beauty itself and not the arranging. But I would love that. Are you committing to saying yes to that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
But I also, as you're talking back to the hospitality idea, because setting the atmosphere with life is really inviting and fosters hospitality too.
Yeah.
So maybe I need to appreciate this more. No, it's not that I've like totally painted myself as this anti-floral arranging person, but it's not that I don't appreciate it. I don't like it being like the stereotypical, like that's what, here, honey, you arrange the flowers for the women's
barefoot
tea.
in the kitchen.
Yeah. You do that. That's safe for you. That's what I get like, about.
You don't want to be told you're supposed to like it, but you do see the value of it, right?
That's it.
I think I probably agreed with that more a few years ago, like had that mentality. And then as I read through scripture and realized
Wait, which mentality?
The mentality of like, oh yeah, I don't want to be like pegged as like this woman who wears pink and
Right.
has sparkles and like all those things and arranges flowers and is like barefoot in the kitchen. But when you read through the Bible, you see over and over the emphasis they put on making things beautiful.
Yeah.
Like this number of pomegranates that are part of this temple that we're putting together. And I just realized like, wow, like people choose to spend a lot of time and money and resources on these things sometimes.
Right.
And especially when it comes to celebrations that bring glory to God, I think it's so important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'll
bring you flowers soon.
Agree. Bring
Show
me
you how to
flowers and
arrange
show
them.
me. Yes, I'll pay you for that.
Okay, Molly. So before we let our guests go, we always have a few questions at the end that we love to ask. So first, we're going to talk. We want to hear your thoughts, and we know you work with young people, so I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts. But this podcast we started with our daughters in mind, with wanting to put women in front of them who are true role models of strength. And so when you think of the next generation, as you work with younger women, what is some advice that you would give to them, or something you wish someone would have told you, or something you're thankful that someone told you when you were younger?
Something my parents told me years ago when we were talking about we'll go with some companions I had, not in the friend realm, but companions that weren't always great. And I was trying to figure out and navigate things in life and wanting to spend time with them, but wanting to pursue things that would draw me closer to Christ. And my dad made a comment. He said, Molly, God doesn't care as much about where you've come from as where you are going. And I think that we let our history hold us back, whether it's the family that we grew up in or the family we didn't grow up in, or the financial peace and security we had as children or we didn't, or opportunity for education, or this job, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I just think like how much when we choose not to have an attitude of contentment and thankfulness and gratitude for what God has given us, it just completely robs us of our joy. And a joyless person is really hard to be around. You don't get encouraged by them. They don't inspire good things in you. If anything, sometimes I feel like they zap you of your joy. And so I think just this entire thought of, Lord, today you have put things in front of me and I can choose to pick up my cross. I can choose to bear these things. I can choose to go out with an attitude of gratitude, or I can sit here and wish for all of these things. Just back to even starting the foster care thing. In my head, it just made sense of this is all going to fall into place. When that's not really the story of God's grand design. His story is that he takes broken people, and we are in a broken world, and we make beautiful things. He has made beautiful things out of us.
Quotable.
So, I think that's a huge part of it. I would also say, parents underestimate how much they dictate their children's lives in a good way. I think parents can be overbearing or sometimes micromanaging or whatever, but at the end of the day, if you have your children on a line or on a fence, and if you let them go so far away because you want them to establish their own boundaries or figure out who it is that they want to serve, I don't think most of us as adults look back and go, oh, I'm so grateful you gave me all of these liberties. That absolutely happened for me a few years after I'd come to Summit, and I was grumbling a little bit about I was raised in a really conservative family, and I think that it's been detrimental in these areas. And this dear friend of mine was like, can you imagine if you were on the other side of the fence? And I was like, I wouldn't be a Christian.
Right.
I'm maybe that's too extreme to say, but the reality is God has established parents and mentors to come alongside and encourage people in the way they should go. We have so much freedom, especially as young adults, to go and pursue whatever it is the Lord wants us to pursue, or pursue the worldly things that we in our hearts just want to pursue, which we've absolutely done that as well. But I would say, don't ever underestimate the power that parents have over their children, and that God has called your parents to raising you the way that they are. And it's usually a very beautiful thing, especially if you have godly parents. So to young women out there, I would say, oh man, love and honor and serve and pray for your family and respect the people that are in leadership over you.
I really love that advice. Abigail, Anna, and Allie, can you especially listen? I'm just kidding. And if you're looking for a place to donate, because we just told your children to listen to you, God has placed you in their lives. So if you want to donate, colsoncenter.org/something. But I'm just kidding. No, but that's so true. And I realized that I grew up in a really conservative home as well. And I remember as a teenager being like, my parents are so strict. And now that I'm a parent, I'm like, why did they let me do all of those things? And thank God for parents. I'm so grateful. Okay, I know you're a reader. So what books do you have going right now? I'm assuming it's books.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I do have a number of books going. At the start of every year, I get a stack going and want to read so many books a month or whatever it is. I'm currently reading 4. I'm reading a memoir like Elizabeth Elliot, who wrote A Chance to Die, going after Amy Carmichael's story, which actually, taking on to your last question, I would say also impact your children by the books that they read.
Yes.
100% that impacts who you grew up to be, I think.
Yeah.
My parents gave us lots of missionary stories. So now as an adult, I'm reading actually the whole story of her life. So A Chance to Die.
I just bought that one for my mom because of our conversation with Carol. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful read. Yes. I'm also reading The Body Keeps the Score. Talks about the trauma and what happens with like the brain and the mind and the heart in dealing with traumatic things in life.
Wow.
So it's excellent read. Of all books to be reading at the start of this beautiful year, I am reading the book about the Plymouth Plantation, which has been a beautiful reminder of why people chose to stand up for wanting religious freedom for their children and their families for generations to come. Yeah. A little sad to read it in these times and realizing how different things look, but a beautifully inspiring read. Mm-hmm. And for fun then, I am reading a series, the Little Britches series, Ralph Moody, which we grew up reading like Laura Ingalls Wilder, all that. I've never read that, so I got it as a Christmas gift, and I'm reading through this.
And apparently that is something you should read with boys, because I've got that on my list to read with Hunter, but with all the boys that are coming in and out of your life, that's a good one to read.
So, yeah.
Okay, and we're going to put links to all those books in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on a walk or washing dishes, we will link to the show notes, all those books that you mentioned.
Or Fighting Fires.
In case you didn't catch. Or Fighting Fire. Can you tell what I'm usually doing when I listen to podcasts? I'm all on a run or driving your kids somewhere. Okay, last question, Molly. What woman in history, if you could choose any woman, would you love to sit and have coffee with?
Mary Slessor, a woman who was willing to walk away from a family that she loved but grew up in incredible hardship and go and pursue the missionary world in West Africa and dedicate her life and sacrifice her own health and to go and rescue children in the bush and to fight these crazy battles of bringing dignity to humanity, and just an incredible story. And
she was single, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah, she was.
Is there a biography about her you could recommend?
The first book I ever read about her was called Trial by Poison. It's part of the Trailblazer series. And that book is just seared in my mind. I read it very young. I probably reread it numerous times. Read that to your children.
Yes.
But Mary Slessor. I would sit across the table.
Say the title one more time.
Trial by Poison by Dave and Etta Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's the Trailblazer series that Carol Joy Seid mentioned on our podcast with her. So that's funny you mentioned that. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Molly. This has been a delight. I feel like we could have gone on a lot longer because this just brought up more questions for me, but we so appreciate you taking the time with us today.
I love the work that you ladies are doing and casting a vision for young women. Very thankful for you guys. So.
Yeah, we're thankful. And thanks for sharing all the different aspects of your life. And I hope as people listen to your story, they're encouraged to do like what you're doing, is just you're ministering to the opportunities and things around you and doing incredible things. So thank you so much for being open and humble and honest about all you're doing. So thanks, Molly.